Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. FBI Director Kash Patel with an announcement on fentanyl precursors after his visit to China and the White House's response to the beginning of the end of the government shutdown. House Democrats are ready to reject the Senate reached a deal to reopen the government. Some have even called for Leader Schumer to step down. Will any Democrats defect and join Republicans to end the shutdown? A new task force launched to cut off crypto scams that the U.S. Attorney for D.C. says is backed by Chinese criminals. A federal audit shows California issued thousands of licenses to drivers who didn't meet federal rules. Those licenses are now being taken away, and some were given to even valid longer than the driver's work permits allowed. Ukraine is seeking to buy 25 additional Patriot defense systems from the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting his Ukrainian counterparts during a G7 summit in Canada today.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. FBI Director Kash Patel making a surprise appearance at the White House press briefing today, announcing a deal with China to curb the export of fentanyl precursors. And the White House blaming Democrats for the effects of the government shutdown as the House is set to vote on a bill to reopen the government tonight. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent, Mari Otsu, who was just at the briefing. Mari, good afternoon. So what's the latest?
Don, good afternoon. Well, FBI Director Kash Patel made a surprise appearance at the White House press briefing today, announcing just a week after he visited China that he came out with a deal where China has agreed to tighten exports on the chemicals that are used to make fentanyl. Patel says that just this year, the FBI has seized 1,900 kilograms of fentanyl, which represents a 31% increase from the same time period last year. And Patel saying that that's the equivalent of enough fentanyl to kill 127 million Americans. Patel's visit was the first time an FBI director has visited China in the past decade, and Patel says that the sole purpose of his trip was to eliminate these so-called fentanyl precursors. Take a look.
The People's Republic of China has fully designated and listed all 13 precursors utilized to make fentanyl. Furthermore, they have agreed to control 7 chemical subsidiaries that are also utilized to produce this lethal drug. Effective immediately, essentially, President Trump has shut off the pipeline that creates fentanyl that kills tens of thousands of Americans. These substances are now banned, and they will no longer be utilized by the Mexican drug trafficking organizations or any other DTOs around the world to make this drug.
Patel's announcement is coming nearly 2 weeks after President Trump met with CCP leader Xi Jinping in Busan, South Korea. And meanwhile, the White House is criticizing Democrats for the effects of the government shutdown. This is coming as the House is expected to vote tonight on a bill to reopen the government, with President Trump expressing confidence that the bill will pass. Take a look at what Press Secretary Lovett has to say.
The damage caused by the Democrats with this reckless government shutdown cannot be forgotten. It is entirely the fault of the Democrat Party. Just look at the vote count. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees have missed their paychecks. Tens of billions in wages and benefits were withheld, impacting vulnerable families. Millions of low-income Americans missed their SNAP benefits. Nearly 20,000 flights at airports across the country were delayed. And our economy has lost billions and billions of dollars in economic activity over the course of this shutdown, hurting consumer sentiment and crushing the travel and hospitality industries.
Democrats, meanwhile, as they are returning to the Capitol for the vote, are raising the possibility that another shutdown may happen in January if they aren't able to get concessions on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies that are set to expire at the end of the year. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. The bill moving through Congress to end the shutdown is under scrutiny. It includes a provision allowing 8 Republican senators to seek hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages over alleged privacy violations. Here's more.
The alleged incidents stem from the Biden administration's investigation of the January 6 Capitol breach. The clause would make it retroactively illegal in most cases to obtain a senator's phone records without notification. It would also let those affected sue the Justice Department for up to $500,000 per violation, plus legal fees. The Justice Department could choose to settle the claims rather than fight them in court. Democrats are criticizing the measure, saying it would hand large taxpayer-funded payouts to certain Republican lawmakers. The phone records in question were obtained under subpoenas issued during Special Counsel Jack Smith's probe into efforts challenging the 2020 election results.
The House of Representatives is set to vote tonight on a bill to reopen the government. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the latest on this.
Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to come out and say that we believe the long national nightmare will be over tonight. It was completely and utterly foolish and pointless in the end, as we said all along.
The House of Representatives will vote tonight on a bill to end the government shutdown. House Democrats continue to express their disappointment with the deal reached by Senate Democrats with Senate Republicans.
Senator Schumer could have blocked this if he had wanted to. And one of the challenges is, in addition to the healthcare premium spikes, it undermines the narrative that this was a Trump shutdown. We need fresh faces. We need new leadership. I have a lot of respect for Senator Schumer's 50 years of service.
House Republican leadership has made it clear who they think is to blame for the pain caused by the longest ever shutdown in American history.
Many American families who were made to go hungry over the last several weeks, our troops and other federal employees who are wondering where their next paycheck would come from. All of that's on the Democrats. Just never forget, they voted 15 times between the House and the Senate to close your government. And the Republicans tried every single day of the shutdown to open it, and we voted 15 times to do that.
And House Democrats insist that the shutdown was forced in order to address health care policy priorities that Democrats have.
Republicans have created a health care crisis all across America. Largest cut to Medicaid in American history. Hospitals, nursing homes, and community-based health centers closing all throughout the country because of what Republicans did in their one big ugly bill.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is also expected to swear in Adelita Grijalva, who won the special election in Arizona to replace her late father, Raul Grijalva.
You know, this is not something, it's undemocratic, it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, should never happen. This kind of obstruction cannot happen again, regardless of party. Their job is to swear people in, and 813,000 Southern Arizonans haven't had support during the shutdown because of Speaker Johnson's lack of transparency and willingness to do his job.
Adelita Grijalva has promised that once she's sworn in, she will sign into the discharge petition to release the Epstein files. Her signature would push the discharge petition to 218 votes, a majority in the House, which would force a vote on the motion on the House floor. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Does the U.S. need health insurance reform? To discuss this, we're bringing in Jeffrey Tucker, founder and president of the Brownstone Institute and senior economics columnist for the Epoch Times. Jeffrey, always great to see you. So does the system that finances healthcare need reform in your view?
Desperately, and the Republicans have been given a golden opportunity by President Trump, who tweeted out that the government's money should go directly to taxpayers rather than insurance companies, which he called corrupt and overfunded. And that's exactly right. I mean, so this is a brilliant opportunity for them to entirely reform health insurance. What matters here is that, you know, even if the money goes, if government money goes not to health insurance companies but to individuals, they still face a very truncated marketplace where you can't just get catastrophic insurance. You have to buy into one of these predefined benefits packages, and the cost of this insurance is going through the roof. It's at $27,000 per person and set to rise much higher over the coming months and years. So what I'm suggesting here is that Trump is exactly right. The money should go to individuals instead of insurance companies, but the marketplace for insurance needs to be entirely opened up. So insurers need to be able to offer a menu of options to individuals, and that their premiums should be adjustable based on the risk of the individuals who are being insured. And that would do the most possible to reduce premiums under these emergency circumstances.
So, Jeffrey, a couple of things. Now, you say that we should rather have government funds go directly to citizens instead of insurers. How would this help? What's the impact of that? I mean, I would imagine insurers might not be too thrilled about this.
Oh, no, they'll be very unhappy about it, of course. But that's one of the biggest industries in the United States, and it's heavily subsidized by government. And there's no cost controls associated with healthcare now. The insurers are very much in charge of people's healthcare rather than their doctors. If we can just change the system so that we can restore that doctor-patient relationship, that would go a long way towards reducing costs. And a very beginning step of that is to give the money directly to individuals instead of to the insurers, and let the individuals shop for the best health care expenditures. The problem is that once they get out on the marketplace, they find that there's not really available a kind of a market base of options. I mean, just one, for example, everybody's being forced to pay for mental health coverage whether they want it or not. And that's just in these defined benefits packages, that's how this works. And the costs of them are going through the roof. People are paying for insurance they don't even use. And the deductibles are so high that once you start using it, then your costs are really going to increase. So this $27,000 figure I mentioned, that's before you use any of the actual health care. This is just to get you in the door. But once you start using the services from these exchanges, then they come after you for everything you're worth. And for a lot of people, their health insurance is higher than their rents or their mortgages at this point. So we've approached an emergency situation. Trump knows this. It's harming him politically and harming the Republicans politically. So my argument that I said in this Epoch Times article is that under these conditions, the Republicans need to act immediately to not only enact Trump's proposed reforms, giving the subsidies directly to individuals rather than to insurance companies. That will help reduce costs. But then after that, we still have many other substantial reforms to make that would change a lot of the logic of Obamacare. They called it the Affordable Care Act, but it's not affordable at all. It's completely unaffordable. There are ways to fix that, but it's going to mean getting into the wires of the system and pulling them out and replacing them with something much more market-oriented that restores the doctor-patient relationships.
So Jeffrey, can you talk a little bit more on what needs to happen to eliminate some of the problems in the system? You mentioned a couple of them already. Maybe you can talk about a bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the issues is that when you get life insurance, the very first thing they do is they check, and they have the actuaries come in and check your risk, and your premiums are assessed based on your risk. Because the insurer wants to make money and you want to be insured. So that's how we have a competitive market for life insurance. The same thing is true in home insurance. If you're living on a floodplain, you're going to pay more than you would otherwise. And the same thing is true with auto insurance. If you get a lot of tickets, you're going to be paying higher premiums because insurance is necessarily related to risk. Now, incredibly, Obamacare changed that system in healthcare. So it doesn't matter how healthy you get. I could be tremendously obese and inactive, and then lose a bunch of weight and join a gym and become a major athlete who's exercising every day. My premiums won't change at all, even though my risk profile has completely shifted. So we need insurers in the position of insuring not just these large pools of risk, but individuals. And that way, individuals will face an incentive to get healthy again. Right now, we've got this Make America Healthy Again movement, and everybody's telling you get healthy, but there's no financial benefit to you directly in terms of what you're paying for your health insurance. If you would benefit financially, so you realize, okay, being overweight is costing me $500 per month, you might rethink your diet and your exercise regime, because everybody wants to save money now. Getting healthy and saving money are the same thing under what I'm suggesting. This was the way the system worked in the past before Obamacare. But Obamacare came in and pooled all the risks of so many groups, And sure enough, over the last 15 years, Americans have gotten tremendously unhealthy as a result. And I think this is one of the reasons why. So if we could just restore something like a system where the actuaries assess individual risk, where individuals control their healthcare spending, and they can choose among a menu of options from all insurers, and ideally that the HSA system, health savings accounts, could be extended to everybody, regardless of their insurance status, so that people could save money tax-free, spend it on a range of healthcare options. That would all dramatically reduce the cost of healthcare in this country instantly. And what I'm saying is that the Republicans could and should pass such a comprehensive sweeping bill immediately while they have the majority, and that would dramatically reduce healthcare spending and increase the health of Americans.
So you were talking about this point as well, Jeffrey, in your article on the Epoch Times. I read it earlier today. You were saying that someone who smokes or drinks, they quit that, or they're overweight and they lose the weight. It has no impact on how much money they pay. So my question is, can health insurance become that granular?
Yeah, well, it used to be that granular. It's the same. Again, it's granular for life insurance, granular for homeowners insurance, and it's granular for car insurance. Now, all those are all too high, but can you imagine if you had to share risk pools with 1 million other people, and that your great driving record wouldn't have any effect on reducing your premiums, or your health wouldn't change any of your premiums in your life insurance? That would be a completely crazy system, but that's exactly the system that we've implemented in healthcare. Now, the excuse they've given is that they don't want any discrimination for against pre-existing conditions, and that's a noble desire. But what it's done is it's taken out the market logic of all health insurance. There are surely ways that we can insure people who have pre-existing conditions while also rewarding people for getting healthy, for being healthy, so that they pay less insurance. This is really important. You know, people forget that your health is very much connected to, in many cases, in most cases, to your own life decisions. So we need the economics of the health insurance industry to match with people's own individual decision-making incentives to get healthy. That will, by itself, massively reduce the burden on the healthcare system and lower prices. And my suggestion is that we have to do this, like, right away, because right now, at the level of premiums that are being increased right now, the Republicans are approaching the political danger zone and being blamed for a system that they didn't set up. This is all Obamacare that did this. And it's up to them, up to the Republicans, to finally just get rid of all the guts and machinery of that entire system that has driven up healthcare insurance prices so high and healthcare prices so high. We've got a system that doesn't even have posted prices, and the insurers are running everything. The insurance companies are telling doctors what they can do without any posted prices for the consumer. This is making people very angry, and I think the Republicans could gain a great deal of popularity with their base and with the American people more broadly by finally doing something about it and bringing a market-based, actuarially driven system back to healthcare, just like we had it before, but better.
Okay, well, Jeffrey, that's our time today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And President Trump says he has an obligation to sue the BBC. He made the comment during an interview on Fox News yesterday that aired. Take a listen.
They actually changed my January 6th speech, which was a beautiful speech, which was a very calming speech, and they made it sound radical. And they actually changed it. What they did was rather incredible. They're showing me the results later on, the results of what they did, how they butchered it up.
But tonight you are saying to our viewers that you will go forward and file a defamation lawsuit against the BBC.
Well, I think I have an obligation to do it because you can't allow people to do that.
The BBC has been plunged into its biggest crisis in decades after its two most senior staff, Director General Tim Davie and Head of News Deborah Turness quit over the weekend. That follows criticism over accusations of bias at the BBC, including over how it edited the speech by President Trump. The broadcaster spliced together two parts of a January 6, 2021 speech that occurred nearly an hour apart. The end result made it appear like Trump directed his supporters to breach the U.S. Capitol. President Trump has threatened to sue the BBC for at least $1 billion. BBC Chair Samir Shah has apologized for editing the footage. A spokesperson said the broadcaster is reviewing the letter sent by Trump's legal team. President Trump has threatened a $1 billion defamation lawsuit against BBC for splicing together two different parts of his January 6 speech. Joining us to discuss is Bobby Ann Cox, a New York attorney and legal analyst. She's also a fellow at the Brownstone Institute. Bobby Ann, great to have you here on this afternoon. So what would Trump's lawsuit against the BBC hinge on legally?
So legally, this would look like a defamation lawsuit. And in our country, defamation lawsuits can only be successful if the plaintiff proves basically four intentional issues. You have to prove as the plaintiff in a defamation case that the defendant made a false statement about you. That's the first thing. The second thing is they have to prove that it was communicated to a third party. So the statement couldn't have been made just in private between you and the other person. It had to have been made public to a third party. They also need to prove that the defendant acted with actual malice because this is the president of the United States. He is a public figure. And therefore, it is a higher standard that has to be proven. You cannot just prove regular negligence in this instance. It would have to be this higher standard of actual malice, meaning they intended to make this statement with malintentions. And then the final fourth thing that has to be proven in a defamation case for it to be successful is that there was an actual harm that was actually sustained by the plaintiff as a result of what the defendant said or did. So this is, these four things would have to be proven by the president against the BBC. In relation to this editing of his speech from January 6, 2021. And if he can prove all four of those prongs, then the case could be successful. So yes, this is a straightforward defamation case. There will be questions as to each one of those four prongs, particularly whether or not it was published to a third party within the United States, because the BBC is, of course, a government media station, and it is in the United Kingdom, right? It's British. So that's going to be one of the hurdles in this case, but certainly possible.
Okay, so Bobby Ann, I actually have a clip here with me. So before I ask you the next question, I'll play this comparing the edited version versus the original. So take a look.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
Now, Bobby Ann, the BBC chairman actually admitted that the way the speech was edited did give the impression of a direct call for violent action. So, I mean, is this an admission? Does this count as an admission of liability?
Well, certainly, first of all, I'm glad that you played that clip just now. It really shows the viewers what was done by the BBC in their editing of the speech from January 6th. They took two different parts of his speech, which occurred almost an hour apart, and they strung them together to make it sound like President Trump was saying, let's march down to the Capitol, and I'll be with you, and let's shake things up, in essence. So that's not anything at all what he said. And yeah, I mean, this is a problem. I mean, we have, the BBC is a prestigious news organization. They intentionally did this editing, which was very obviously a negative attempt to portray the president of our country in a negative light. And yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that this is something that could be the basis of a defamation case. And did they admit liability? That's going to be an argument. Certainly, if there is a lawsuit filed by the president against the BBC, that is going to be an issue that is certainly raised. That, hey, look, they said sorry. They made a public apology, and could this be deemed an admission of guilt? In my opinion, yes, it can. But that would be something that would be raised certainly during the course of a trial if it gets that far. And the fact that two of their top, as you mentioned earlier, two of their top personnel at the BBC have resigned over the weekend because of this. So, is that an admission of guilt? Well, certainly that would be brought up and put into evidence, I would think, by the president and his legal team if this did indeed turn into a lawsuit, and if that lawsuit did indeed go to trial. So those are two important things, and a very good question in this instance.
Okay, so Bobby Ann, earlier you raised the issue of whether this documentary was played in the U.S. or not, and the potential legal hurdles. Well, reports are saying that the BBC said the documentary was not broadcast in the U.S. Is that going to present some challenges if Trump brings a lawsuit to trial?
It could potentially cause some issues. It could be a hurdle that the president would have to jump over in order to successfully have his claim of defamation. The reason for that is, BBC, as we said, is a British-based media company. They're claiming that this was something that aired only in the UK, not in the United States. And President Trump can't sue in England for this because they have a 1-year statute of limitations, as I understand, for defamation cases. So he would have to indeed sue here in the United States. It's being said that he would sue potentially in Florida if he does bring a lawsuit, because that's his primary residence. So yeah, there would need to be some sort of proof that people in Florida did see this particular documentary. And because that, as I said in the beginning, that is one of the prongs of this 4-prong test in order to be successful at having a defamation lawsuit, is that you have to prove that it was communicated to a third party, and as a result of that, injury did take place. So, if they can prove that this was only aired in the UK and no Americans, particularly Floridians, saw this, then that could be a hurdle and a block to a successful defamation lawsuit. But, in the world of the internet today, even something that's aired only in one country does not tend to stay solely in that country because of the internet and the capabilities we have there. So I'm not sure if that would be a valid argument to block a successful defamation case. That would be something that the court indeed would have to decide.
So then, Bobby, on that note, what is your analysis on whether President Trump has a strong case or not?
I think that he does have a strong case. If you look at the facts overall, you look at the video, which you showed earlier, the clip of what was actually said during his speech on January 6th, and then what the BBC edited. And then you take into account the fact that, the BBC apologized publicly for the poor editing of that video. The fact that they had two of their very highest personnel stepped down as a result of this. All of these things play into, evidence and whether or not this would be a strong case. And clearly there was malintent. This aired in the UK just a few days before the November election last year, and certainly did not portray President Trump in a positive light. So I do think that they have a strong case here. The question will, of course, be, do they bring the lawsuit? Does the president actually bring the lawsuit against the BBC? I understand his attorneys issued a letter to the BBC demanding that there be a public apology and some compensation. And I believe the deadline for that is this Friday, the 14th of November. So, we have to see if the BBC complies and if what they do is sufficient according to the president's demand letter. And if not, does he take this to court? Does he actually file the lawsuit? Those are two big questions. We have to see how that pans out. But if he does file the suit, I think he has a strong case here. It's certainly the evidence is mounting, and you can't actually, say, hey, listen, I'm a foreign entity and you can't sue me because I'm not a U.S. corporation. The BBC does have presence in our country. They do have, at least in New York and I believe in L.A., they do have offices. They do operate here in our country. So this is something that is certainly opening the door to a viable defamation lawsuit. So we'll see how this plays out in the next couple of days here.
Well, all right, Bobby Ann, I think we covered just about every aspect of this. Really enjoying hearing your analysis. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks for having me on.
Now a look at the weather. The first taste of winter is here. A powerful blast of Arctic air plunged much of the country into a deep freeze this week. Here's a closer look at some early winter weather.
From Alabama to Florida and Georgia, nearly 18 million people spent the first half of the week under a freeze warning, a shock to many after temperatures just days ago were in the 70s and 80s. In Jacksonville, Florida, a low of 28 degrees broke the city's previous daily record for November 11th, set back in 1977. The cold was so extreme that Florida even issued what's jokingly called a falling iguana advisory. The forecaster with the National Weather Service explained that when temperatures dip below 40, iguanas begin to fall from trees. Posts of stunned reptiles appeared across social media as Floridians bundled up in coats, a rare sight even for November. Meanwhile, across the Great Lakes and Northeast, heavy lake-effect snow brought hazardous driving and whiteout conditions. Some towns in Michigan and New York were buried under nearly half a foot of snow earlier this week, with wind chills well below freezing. Communities like Buffalo, Syracuse, and Niagara Falls woke up Tuesday under winter weather advisories, with forecasters predicting up to 6 inches of accumulation. In the Midwest, Indiana recorded its first measurable snowfall this season on Monday, causing more than 100 accidents in just one day. And in California, forecasters are tracking an atmospheric river expected to bring heavy rain and mountain snow later this week. The long plume of tropical moisture that formed over the Pacific Ocean will begin drenching the San Francisco Bay Area starting today, before quickly moving south. And in parts of the south, the frigid air created something beautiful, so-called frost flowers. Thin layers of ice emerge from stems of local plants in Kentucky and Arkansas. The current cold snap won't last too long. Forecasters say much of the U.S. will warm up by the second half of the week. Moving up north to Quebec, hundreds of thousands were without power yesterday after the province's first major snowstorm of the season over the weekend. Montreal's weather agency recorded nearly 8 inches of snow.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is warning of travel chaos if Congress fails to end the shutdown by this weekend. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on that. Plus, we hear from passengers caught in the travel breakdown.
The warning comes after one of the worst travel weekends since the shutdown began over 40 days ago, with more than 4,500 flights canceled. Thousands of air traffic controllers have been calling in sick, having gone weeks without pay, forcing airports to slow operations to maintain safety. Transport Secretary Sean Duffy says 6% of recent cancellations came from the FAA, speaking on Fox News.
And that's because the number one job is to keep the airspace safe.
Duffy says if air traffic controllers get paid, the country will be well on the way to recovery.
But if they don't get paid, I made this point today, you're going to see airlines seriously consider grounding their aircraft. They're not going to fly if we get to Friday and the government's not open.
Airlines canceled 1,200 flights yesterday as air traffic control staffing improved significantly ahead of an expected end to a record-setting government shutdown as soon as today. On Monday, President Trump threatened to dock the pay of any controller who didn't return to work. The shutdown has forced 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 TSA agents to work without pay. Martin Nguyen was traveling to Colorado Springs to visit the Garden of the Gods to get in touch with nature.
So while we were there, we received a text message telling us that our original flight returning back home was going to be postponed for a day after the original date.
Martin says it was a good thing he was staying with family, so he had a place to stay.
But yeah, definitely was not prepared for that. So we had to contact our work and everything to make sure that we were able to get that taken care of.
Traveler Mike Ricks says reopening the government is the right decision.
We have so many people that are dependent on government subsidies, other government programs.
Ricks says he's worried about returning home Friday evening.
And so we're keeping close tabs on our flight and making sure that's still on track. But yes, definitely worried about getting back home.
Over 5 million passengers have been affected by staffing-related delays or cancellations since the shutdown began on October 1st. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thousands of commercial truck licenses are being revoked in California after a federal audit revealed several violations. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy demanded the action, calling the state's licensing system a threat to public safety. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
California has revoked 17,000 commercial truck driver licenses that were illegally issued to non-domiciled drivers. The move comes after a demand from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy in September. A federal audit found that 1 in 4 non-domiciled licenses in California were issued without meeting federal requirements, and some were valid longer than the driver's work permit allowed.
So in plain English, this is a license to operate a massive 80,000-pound truck that's being issued to foreign drivers who are not U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. The process for issuing these licenses is absolutely 100% broken.
The Department of Transportation says California's DMV violated federal regulations. In a post on X, Duffy accused Governor Gavin Newsom's administration of being caught red-handed after weeks of claiming they had done nothing wrong. Earlier this year, Duffy called several state systems a serious danger for travelers and announced 2 immediate steps.
Here's the bottom line. Non-citizens will not be eligible for a CDL unless they meet a much stricter set of rules. Second, all states must immediately pause the issuance of non-domiciled CDLs until they can comply with our new rules.
Notices have now been sent out to all affected drivers, and their licenses will expire within 60 days. Meanwhile, Nevada is taking steps to comply with the federal rule. The state DMV announced it will phase out non-domiciled or limited-term commercial driver's licenses and learner's permits, pausing new issuance and its renewals immediately. About 980 drivers statewide will be affected, and existing licenses will expire naturally based on their lawful stay. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth addressed the Defense Summit in Fort Wayne, Indiana today. The annual event brings together top U.S. national security officials, industry experts, and business leaders, and state and local officials. Hegseth talked about this time as the secretary so far, saying President Trump gave him a 10-point plan before entering the role. Here's Hegseth.
Bring the warrior spirit back to the military. We need the warrior spirit back. And that has been our guidepost, as the senator mentioned, from the beginning. I mean, I could lay out the 10 points, and it's been America first, peace through strength, common sense, revive the warrior ethos, rebuild the military, reestablish deterrence. We're going to defend the homeland. We're going to deter China. We're going to make sure our allies do their part in burden sharing, and we're going to revive the defense industrial base. That's 10 points, general overview of what the president prescribed us to do, what the Department of War has been focused on, and the urgent threats that we need to orient on.
Hegseth says the department has been successfully focusing on those points since Trump returned to office. He added that the department is emphasizing those efforts instead of nation building in foreign countries. According to Hegseth, following those guidelines will bring back what he calls the golden age of America. November 11th is a day observed across North America. In Canada, it's known as Remembrance Day, a time to honor veterans and members of the armed forces who made sacrifices for peace and freedom. Here's a closer look.
Across the country, civilians and service members gathered before memorials, bowing their heads in silent remembrance of those who gave their lives for the nation.
Without their sacrifice, we wouldn't have the freedom that we have, and that's the greatest honor that you could have, is to sacrifice your life for others. And here we are, 80-some years later, still remembering them, and I hope it continues.
It's service to Canada as a whole. The young, the old, those of us that came before, those of us that will come after. It is about making sure that we leave a peaceful and stable society for our children and for ourselves now.
Canada needs to stand on its own feet in the world, and this is one way that we can do it through military service. I hope the world moves into a more peaceful state.
Privileged to be able to follow in my father's footsteps as he followed in his father's.
As the ceremony went on, the atmosphere remained solemn. While honoring the fallen, many reflected on the meaning of peace, carrying both remembrance and hope for the years ahead.
With the history of war, nobody ever wins. It saddens me what's going on in the world right now with wars breaking out all over. It's very tragic still in our day and time when we've learnt and lived through so many wars and we've seen what it's accomplished. I only wish for world peace.
It is a time where we stand up and we protect those that can't and be the nation we should be.
Beyond the ceremonies, many see Remembrance Day as a chance to pass on gratitude and reflection to the next generation.
I've encouraged my children to observe it, and reading that to the service is a way of continuing the tradition and remembering.
I think it's important to remember what all brought us here so that we can do better for the future.
NTD News, Canada.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio continues meeting G7 foreign ministers in Canada today. Ukraine's foreign minister is attending as well. Ukraine is seeking to buy 25 additional Patriot defense systems from the U.S. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is among the G7 officials welcoming Ukraine's foreign minister in Canada on Wednesday. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky recently said he wants to order 25 Patriot air defense systems from the United States. Meanwhile, Canada has announced additional sanctions on people and entities involved in Russia's drone program. The measure will affect 13 people and 11 entities, including several involved in the development and deployment of Russian drones. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, Kiev is battling an alleged major $100 million corruption scheme. Anti-corruption authorities say they detained 5 people suspected of involvement in the alleged plot to control procurement in state energy enterprises. Ukraine's government is now being shaken up. On Wednesday, the country's energy minister resigned, while the justice minister was suspended. This comes after President Vladimir Zelensky called for their dismissal.
I believe the Justice Minister and Energy Minister can no longer remain in their positions. This is a matter of trust. If there are accusations, they must be addressed.
The corruption in the energy sector comes as Russia keeps attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which brings blackouts across the country ahead of winter.
I was actually very angry after the shelling of the energy infrastructure because it turns out that our energy facilities are not protected for this year of the war.
The scandal also hurts Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. Fighting corruption is central to Kiev's goal for EU membership. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
FBI Director Kash Patel led today's White House press briefing with an update on the Trump administration's crackdown on fentanyl. Patel was in Beijing last week to address the topic.
We must attack fentanyl precursors, the ingredients necessary to make this lethal drug. That was the sole purpose of my trip to China, to eliminate these precursors. And if successful, we would suffocate the drug trafficking organization's ability to manufacture fentanyl in places like Mexico. This was the first time an FBI director has been to China in over a decade and received the audience with his counterpart to address this matter directly.
At the meeting, Patel said the leaders reached an agreement to cut off fentanyl into the U.S. Under President Trump, Patel said this year the FBI has seized nearly 2,000 kilograms of fentanyl so far. He said this is enough to kill 127 million Americans, and this is a 30% increase from the same period last year. Later in the briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about a Friday deadline for the BBC to apologize for edits made in a documentary about Trump last year.
And I think that the president was deeply concerned by the editing, the purposeful and dishonest editing of his speech that was so clearly fake news. And he rightfully dubbed that term many years ago. And this is a classic example of that. We see it in the United States all the time. We see it now in the United Kingdom. As you know, the president's external legal counsel has filed a lawsuit against the BBC. We expect that to continue. And whether they apologize or not is up to them.
Leavitt was also asked if this would strain the president's relationship with the prime minister since the BBC is publicly funded. He said Trump has always been very frank when he disagrees with leaders, even those he has a good relationship with. Linda Sun, a former senior New York State government employee, is standing on trial this week alongside her husband, Chris Hu. The U.S. federal government is charging the couple with a total of 19 counts. In the opening statement on Wednesday, a prosecutor described the case as one of betrayal and greed by a senior official that benefited the regime. Here's more.
From 2015 to 2023, Linda Sun worked as former New York Governor Cuomo's senior aide and later on became Governor Kathy Hochul's deputy chief of staff overseeing Asia-related affairs. She and her husband together own millions of dollars worth of properties in New York and Hawaii. But everything changed when federal agents arrested the couple last year. The government's opening statement says Linda Sun betrayed her obligation as a governmental employee and used her role to act at the direction of the Chinese regime to enrich herself. The government also accuses her of betraying New York residents when the COVID-19 pandemic first started to surge in 2020. It says Sun helped her Chinese cousin's company secure federal contracts for purchasing personal protection equipment like masks and medical gloves. When millions of people's lives were on the brink, Sun and her family made millions of dollars through these deals while lying to the New York government about them. Linda Sun's attorney dismissed these accusations, saying Sun was just doing her job. She is not an agent for China. The trial is estimated to last 3 to 4 weeks. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says President Trump's plan for visas is to temporarily bring in expert overseas workers to train Americans. Then they go home and the U.S. workers fully take over. Joining us to discuss is Daniel DiMartino, Manhattan Institute Fellow and founder of the Dissident Project. So Daniel, good afternoon to you. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Daniel, before we get your thoughts, I just wanted to play this clip of President Trump saying the U.S. doesn't have people with certain talents to fill jobs domestically. Take a look.
You don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to put
How did we ever do it before?
Well,
I'll
give you an example. In Georgia, they raided because they wanted illegal immigrants out. They had people from South Korea that made batteries all their lives. You know, making batteries are very complicated. It's not an easy thing and very dangerous. A lot of explosions, a lot of problems. They had like 500 or 600 people, early stages, to make batteries and to teach people how to do it.
Now, Daniel, I understand you're mostly in favor of continuing the H-1B visa program. So could you explain for us why you believe the U.S. needs foreign talent?
Well, I think smart people are a good thing for any society, really. And in the case of the United States, the H-1B visa program, even though it's a flawed program that does need some reform, it is the only, relevant, high-skilled visa channel for a lot of young, intelligent people coming out of American colleges, or that U.S. companies want to bring in order to start a startup, especially in the tech sector, especially even doctors in hospitals, researchers. So that is why, and I think President Trump is exactly right, that America benefits from this. It's not that America needs anything. America doesn't need anything. The question is what's beneficial for American workers. And it is beneficial to bring in people who speak English, who are going to earn high pay, and who are not going to commit crime. That is the ideal type of immigrant.
So, Daniel, you're very much an expert in this topic. So could you address a few of the criticisms of the visa program? So one of them is, does it or does it not take job opportunities away from Americans?
Yeah, so when we think about the impact of immigration in the labor market, when you bring in people from another country, not only does the number of jobs grow, but also the number of opportunities for American workers. This is a great example. When you bring in foreign doctors, we're not saying that we're going to steal the jobs of American doctors. We have a huge doctor shortage. There are hundreds of counties in this country that don't have a primary care physician. So you're actually saving lives by bringing in foreign talent or allowing companies to do it. You encourage them to set up shop here, like President Trump mentioned, a South Korean company that makes batteries. If they're not allowed to bring foreign talent, they just open in Canada, they open in China, they open in another country. And then not only do they bring their foreign talent, but they hire their supporting workforce from that nation there, right? When you open a battery factory here that needs, say, 10% of workers that are foreign, you also bring in the 90% of workers that are American that are now able to work thanks to that partnership.
So Daniel, if we're bringing in foreign workers, sometimes they get paid less. Does it or does it not drive down wages for domestic workers?
Well, I think let's set the facts straight here. The median H-1B visa holder makes $120,000 a year. That is not a low-wage job. Now, could it be higher? Yes. The current problem is that there is much more demand for this visa than number of visas available. Only 85,000 for-profit companies a year. And so the U.S. government, unfortunately, awards them to the hundreds of thousands of companies that want them by lottery. And this is what allows the abuse. So what we need to do in this case is simply say, we're going to award them to the 85,000 highest paid spots, which would actually make the minimum salary around 120,000 and the average salary at over 200,000.
Just a few more, if you could address, could there be national security concerns? Relying on foreign talent, could it discourage Americans from pursuing high-skilled careers?
Well, I actually see it as a national security gain that the United States is stealing the intelligent people from other countries. What is the most effective strategy to ensure that America stays at the top of the world? Brain drain our enemies and even our other countries that are not our enemies, right? Because that prevents them from ever being able to overcome us technologically in many other ways. So that is a loss for China, a loss for India, a loss for other countries, and a win for America. And on the, a lot of people talk about espionage, things like that. Look, the reality is that countries that want to spy on the United States, they can bring in people through marriage, they can bring in people fraudulently, they can bribe American citizens, which they do often. This visa program actually is something that China opposes because they're worried that many of their young, highly intelligent people will come to America through it.
So you mentioned China, right? So let's talk about that. It's obvious that the U.S. wants to remain the world's superpower, right? And it's currently in competition with China. So would you say, could the abolishing or downsizing the H-1B visa program negatively impact the U.S. in this context?
Absolutely. China has a program called the 1,000 Talents Program, in which they pay their graduate students abroad over $100,000 to come back to China and work. They don't want Chinese immigrants who are college educated to leave China. They want them to go back. And so America doesn't need to pay them. America just needs to let them stay. And the sad reality is that even though the H-1B program is flawed, it is the only way for most of these people to stay after they complete complete their studies here. So yes, vet people like Trump is doing. He's even vetting their social media when they're coming here. That is a great thing. But if they're not a communist and they're not a spy and they're intelligent, those are people who should be welcomed.
So Daniel, you mentioned a couple of times that there may be problems with this program. There have been reports that some companies have been abusing this, paying workers less, and then, not actually using this program to fill talent, but to use it to cut costs for their own company. So what are some solutions that you see that could, reform or make this program better?
Well, the one solution that I think has a very much bipartisan support is that you need to stop awarding the visas on a random lottery, but instead give them to the highest paid applicants, no matter their profession. If they're all in healthcare, if they're all in technology, the point is that they have to be the highest paid professional. You kind of have a $60,000 a year interior designer preferred over a $200,000 a year coder, right? You need to go by economic value. And then after that, you do that, companies are going to be able to bring in people without the fraud that is happening now. What is happening now is that a lot of companies are bringing in jobs that, are middle wage jobs, not low wage, but certainly middle wage. And that is really a waste of opportunity for America because there's only 85,000 visa spots. You would rather bring in people who are more highly paid. Look, my own research finds that even on the status quo, the average H-1B visa holder will reduce America's national debt by over $2 million over 30 years because these are immigrants who pay a lot in taxes because they're highly paid and because they don't receive any welfare. So this is a really big win for America. And that's why President Trump, I'm happy to hear that he supports it.
So since we're on the topic of potential solutions, how do you view the new $100,000 fee imposed on the H-1B visa?
Well, the issue with the $100,000 fee is that it's not really binding or very effective at achieving what it wants to do. Neither is the proposed rule for wage selection that the Trump administration drafted. And let me explain this shortly. What happens with the $100,000 fee is that it can be really easily evaded by the bad actors, which are these Indian third-party placement companies that bring in people, will now do so through a internal transfer visa called the L1 and then change them to H-1B. And so the problem with those firms is that they're not actually allowing people to hire workers, but they're just hiring them and then placing them temporarily in lower wage positions in different other companies. They're third-party placers. And then the issue with the rule that the Department of Labor is proposing is that it's prioritizing petitions based on their wage on their occupation. So you're prioritizing, say, a $60,000 a year interior designer over the case I mentioned, a $200,000 a year coder, because a $60,000 wage for interior designers is more impressive than $200K among coders. This doesn't make any sense. We prefer a $200,000 a year offer over a lower one. And so we need pure wage selection. We don't need these occupational adjustments because then these unethical firms will simply change the name of the occupation to get better odds of getting the visa.
All right, Daniel, you've been very clear in your explanation of the H-1B visa program. I just have one last question for you to end this interview. More broadly speaking, what would be the impact, whether it's economic or anything else, of just simply ending the H-1B visa program?
Well, I estimated this exact question, so I'm glad you asked. In my new paper that came out with the Manhattan Institute, if we eliminated the H-1B visa program, America would lose approximately well over $1 trillion over 30 years in net tax revenue and minus spending. So we would be in debt $1 trillion more over 30 years, or GDP would go down by a couple percentage points. And people might say, well, America isn't just GDP. You're right. America isn't just GDP. America is a nation. America is the home of its citizens. But Americans eat what they earn, and we should not be lightly saying that we do not care about GDP or the national debt, because that is the reason driving young people to vote for socialism. That is the reason driving Americans out of home ownership, out of so many things. We want policies that prioritize the well-being, the economic well-being of American workers, and the H-1B visa does just that.
Well, all right, Daniel. Terrific insight today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now over to France, where a court has opened a criminal probe into TikTok after allegations that its algorithm pushed minors towards suicide. The case follows multiple family lawsuits and a damning parliamentary report calling the app a dangerous algorithm. NTD's international correspondent David Vez reports from Paris.
France's justice system has opened a preliminary investigation into social media giant TikTok, following concerns that its algorithm could push minors towards suicide. These follow recent cases of teenagers who committed suicide across the country, and a lawsuit filed by 7 families accusing TikTok of exposing their children to content that encouraged self-harm. The Commission heard from over 170 experts and received 30,000 testimonies from the public. One teenager testified before lawmakers. "At first I saw videos about art and music, but soon everything turned darker. I fell into a harmful loop." Investigators are now examining several potential offenses, including the promotion of methods for taking one's own life. A TikTok spokesperson told Reuters that the Chinese company categorically rejects what it calls the Commission's misleading presentation. French lawmakers have been scrutinizing TikTok for years. In 2023, former Senator André Gattolin contributed to a report on the platform. He says there are signs that the Chinese Communist Party may use TikTok as a tool in its warfare operations.
Generally speaking, social networks like Facebook and others become profitable fairly quickly, turning a profit after 4, 5, or 6 years. TikTok, through Binance, has been around for many years, and they have more expenses than they have resources. They don't sell personal data, and for good reason. They don't market it because the destination is the Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party, which means filing as many people as possible. So the driving idea behind TikTok is not that TikTok should become a leader in its sector according to the accepted rules of international trade or capitalism, so to speak. The idea is to introduce a quasi-military offensive dimension, which could be described as hybrid warfare, in order to truly undermine the integrity and unity of a nation.
In July, TikTok was fined $615 million by an EU agency after an Irish court found that users' data was accessible from China and insufficiently protected. Gattolin says this mass data collection effectively weaponizes TikTok against its users.
We know there's a massive collection of data. It's a way of gaining control over the future of our societies, and that's extremely serious. TikTok said that there is no data transfer, but we have seen in investigations that there were Chinese computer scientists from ByteDance who broke into the app and then transferred data and stole it. You know, all these systems are called backdoors, and so if you leave the door open, you can't say that this is a robbery, I guess.
A parliamentary report published in September 2025 recommended the ban of TikTok for teenagers younger than 15 years old. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Now, a TikTok spokesperson told Reuters that the company invests heavily in age-appropriate experiences for teens, and the company said that it has over 50 preset features to support teen well-being and removes 9 out of 10 videos that violates its rules before anyone sees them. Meanwhile, authorities in Thailand have extradited a Chinese-Cambodian tycoon to China. He is accused of running online gambling sites and cyber scams in Cambodia and Burma, also known as Myanmar.
The man, She Zhijiang, developed Burma's Yatai New City. It's a place the U.S. Treasury Department called notorious for gambling, drug trafficking, prostitution, and scams targeting people around the world, particularly Americans. He was arrested by the Thai police in August 2022. Thai police say he is set to stand trial in China. The United States imposed sanctions against She Zhijiang in September. He previously said his prosecution is politically motivated, alleging involvement by Chinese state security. Sources told the Epoch Times that he was once recruited by the Chinese Communist Party for overseas projects, but later fell out with Beijing after resisting efforts to seize control of his Yatai project in Burma.
Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi has broken decades of the country's strategic ambiguity. She's the first Japanese leader to directly talk about Taiwan's security to her nation's own defense and tying it together. She openly declared that Japan would come to Taiwan's aid militarily if China attacks. Her comments sparked a diplomatic retaliation last week. China's envoy to Japan threatened to cut off the head of Japan's prime minister in a now deleted post on X. Here's more on what happened.
Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has triggered a diplomatic spat with Beijing after saying that a hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo. Here's what we know. Takaichi was asked by an opposition lawmaker in parliament about, quote, survival-threatening situations, a legal term that allows Japan's premiers to deploy the country's self-defense forces. In response, she gave an example that an attempt to bring Taiwan completely under the control of Beijing, using battleships and military force, could constitute such a situation. She later added that an attack on U.S. warships sent to break any Chinese blockade on Taiwan could require Tokyo to intervene militarily to defend itself and its ally. The survival-threatening situation was defined broadly in a controversial 2015 law that expanded the scope of when the pacifist country's military could act. The law was met with large protests at the time. Takaichi also infuriated Beijing by publicizing her meeting with a Taiwanese representative at a regional summit in Seoul in early November. China claims democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory and has not ruled out using force to take control of the island. Taiwan strongly objects to China's sovereignty claims and says only the island's people can decide their future. Takaichi's remarks triggered a threatening post from a Chinese diplomat in Japan, which wrote, quote, the dirty head that sticks itself in must be cut off. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said Beijing lodged a formal protest against what it said was blatant interference in its internal affairs. Taiwan called the Chinese diplomat's remarks toward Takaichi disrespectful and impolite. Responding to China's protest, Japan said it understands and respects Beijing's position on Taiwan, and hoped Taiwan issues would be resolved peacefully through dialogue.
Americans should be seeing substantial relief from tariffs soon. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke about some efforts today on Fox News.
And then the other thing you're going to see in the middle of the year are these Trump accounts. Every child born retroactively to January 1, but for the next 3 years, is going to get a $1,000 account that's going to be invested in the U.S. stock market. So that's another $1,000 for working families.
Bessent also addressed the president's suggestion of $2,000 rebates for families. Bessent confirmed this is in discussion and said it would likely be for families making less than $100,000 a year. But he noted nothing has been decided yet. The Treasury Secretary also said they're working to bring down costs overall. He said the administration is moving toward cutting duties on a number of produce items we don't grow in the U.S., pointing to coffee, bananas, and other fruit. Bessent said that he expects Americans to start feeling better about inflation in the first or second quarter of next year. The penny is suffering the same fate as the dodo bird or the 8-track player. After 238 years, the U.S. is minting its last 1-cent coin.
The cost savings of ending penny production will save the American taxpayer approximately $56 million a year in just production cost alone. Although today we say goodbye to the continued production of our copper 1-cent coin, let me be crystal clear. The penny remains legal tender. We have over 300 billion pennies that remain in circulation, and we encourage you to use them.
Earlier this year, President Trump announced that he ordered the nation to stop making the penny, saying that each one costs nearly 4 cents to create. Other coins, including the nickel, dime, and quarter, will remain in circulation. Although the penny already seems obsolete to some consumers, its removal is causing problems for some merchants who will now have to round prices either up or down, and dropping the penny will create a greater need for nickels, which are a more expensive coin to mint. A scam center strike force has been launched to target crypto fraudsters who the U.S. Attorney for D.C. said are backed by Chinese organized crime. Here's Janine Pirro.
The consequence of these scams are devastating. Older Americans in particular are targets of these scams, many of them lonely, many of them looking to speak to someone who communicates with them, their entire life savings gone, their retirement funds gone, left with no opportunity to go back into the workforce and to re-earn money.
Piro said experts estimate that last year alone, Americans were scammed out of more than $9 billion from crypto fraud. And that's based on underreported numbers. She explained how the fraud usually works. A scammer will reach out through text or social media, gain the person's confidence, and convince them to invest. Piro said that's why they have launched a scam center strike force to take down and recover stolen funds. She said they have the authority to charge foreign defendants and seize foreign property. So far, Piro said they have seized more than $400 million. Additional actions are underway as well to lead the forfeit of $80 million more. A federal appeals panel is hearing arguments this afternoon about whether a spending law passed in July that ended Medicaid reimbursements for Planned Parenthood can remain in effect while legal challenges continue. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
A three-judge panel of the First Circuit Court of Appeals is hearing arguments on Wednesday to consider whether to temporarily block a federal law which ended Medicaid reimbursements to health centers that provide abortion. Planned Parenthood is suing Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy and others with claims that the new law, which became active in September, violates the Equal Protection Clause of the First Amendment. They claim their clinics provide low-income populations access to care, and the provision could force them to shut down or reduce their service offerings. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed into law in July includes a provision that bars federal funds from being used to provide abortion. Healthcare nonprofits like Planned Parenthood that received more than $800,000 in federal funding in 2023 are prohibited from receiving Medicaid reimbursements for 1 year. An appeals court judge in August granted the government's request to stay a lower court's preliminary injunction that had blocked the law until after court proceedings were completed. That judge did not hear oral arguments. On Wednesday, a panel is hearing the arguments and is considering reactivating the lower court's injunction. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss $1,000 Trump accounts for newborns is strategist Alvin Louis, president of Courage is a Habit. So good afternoon to you, Alvin. So you say these accounts will encourage more Americans to emphasize generational wealth. Why is that important today?
Well, America is built on being able to give your children more than you have. That's the American dream, beyond anything else. Whether you're coming here legally as immigrants or you're born here, the ability to give your children more so that they don't have to start in the same place that you do is the core of the American dream. So this program is fantastic if you are looking at America as a place of opportunity, not as a place that is systemically oppressive, which is what they're teaching kids in school.
Can we get your analysis on how impactful these $1,000 accounts will be?
Absolutely, because it's giving a kid a start that a lot of families may not be able to, but it also puts the onus on the families that now that you have this start, that you have to keep it going, and you have to develop things that create this generational wealth, like delayed gratifications, planning, not living for the short term, things of that nature. And this program encourages families so that the child can hold on to that money and not spend it frivolously. It encourages them to hold on to it to at least 30, because at 30 you still get taxed like as a taxable income, but you can take it out for any reason. If you take it out before that, then there's going to be heavier penalties and tax. Or you can hold on to it until you're 59 and a half, because then it turns into an IRA. And it just helps Americans save, because we hear that Americans don't save. There's so many Americans don't have any savings. And so this is really impactful. And the fact that President Trump and his administration is thinking about that, this is what equality is. It's about giving the same starting line. Now, it doesn't mean that you end up the same, because obviously that depends on your decision-making and each individual family.
And what you're describing also, would you say, goes along with education, right? Because you can't achieve a lot of things that you describe without self-discipline and responsibility.
Absolutely. And this is the education that we all imagine education should be, which isn't what government K through 12 is. Because if real education is the love of learning, saying, I don't know this industry, I want to get into this industry, I'm going to be self-sufficient, I'm going to be self-taught. And so now you go, listen, I got this money that it was given to me. I didn't earn it. I was given to me right when I was born. And now I've got this money. How am I going to grow and do with it? And that's truly how we want children and Americans to think. What can I do to grow my life and to hand it off to my children? But see, what happens today in K through 12, you would think this program is great. Who would be against it? But in K through 12 today, they teach kids not critical thinking, not self-discipline, but critical consciousness thinking. It's a core part of critical race theory. And the people that would teach the kids in school, what they're teaching in school today is this program is still oppressive. And you're going to think, how is this oppressive? Every child, no matter what race, gets the same amount of money. This is how insane they are. They'll say this program still benefits white people or people who have some means because they can contribute to this account. And that account's going to grow more, whereas binary and BIPOC people and all intersectionality, marginalized people, they're not going to be able to do as much. So their child is not going to have as much when they reach 30 or 59 and a half, whatever the markers are to take the money out. And this is what they teach children. It's never good enough. It's never good enough that you get something. It always has to be by skin color, by marginalized groups. And it's always about the government giving me more because I fit some kind of some skin color or gender pyramid.
Okay, so Alvin, those are some issues within the education system currently that you have just raised. What do you propose then we should be teaching children?
Well, we should be teaching children that this country is a land of opportunity because it still is. And that it doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter where you come from, that if you want to work hard and you have self-discipline and you have delayed gratification, you are going to be successful in this country. It's just, it's not the speed maybe in which you want to be successful, because everybody is going to be successful at different rates. But this is what you should be teaching children in schools. It's about banking, it's about credit scores, it's about how to finance, how to start a business, but they don't teach any of that in school. They don't even teach that in college. And so what they set up children for is a life of being a social justice activist, so that even when President Trump is literally giving you money for you to be able to just forget about it, you can just put that away and don't even tell your children about it. But that's not how they look at it. They always look at what can you give me today? And this is that reparation mindset. And it's the opposite of what you should be teaching children in school. It's not about that, what can the government do for me? How can government take care of me? Is how can I use the brain and the two hands and the 2 feet and the heart and the lungs that God gave me? And how can I use that to, even if you don't have this esoteric, like better society and change the world, how do I make my life better? At the very least, how do I make my children's life and my grandchildren's life better? And he's giving everybody that opportunity. He's giving them the opportunity, and they're still going to complain, because when you're looking at things through the Marxist lens, nothing's ever good enough unless it's taken from someone else to give to you.
Okay, so Alvin, you raised a word earlier, and that is immediate gratification. So I don't know if this exemplifies this idea. If you look at the ballooning national debt and personal debt levels, perhaps we can say it's clear that people are thinking more about the here and now rather than the future. How do we change this mentality or limit this kind of thinking of immediate gratification?
Well, it really starts with that critical consciousness thinking that I was talking about when I first got on. You cannot have delayed gratification if you're always looking at self. And when you look at not just education, obviously this is very much in education, and which Courage is a Habit my organization really hits on, is that mental health, trauma informed. But that bleeds out of education. Anytime even life throws you a little bit of challenge, everybody's running the therapy. Everything is about mental health. Everything's about a safe space, holding space. I need to be seen. I need to be heard. If your paradigm, if the second you wake up and your feet hits the ground, you're all about your emotions and you're all about therapy and mental health and does someone say something that offended me? If that's your paradigm, then yeah, you're not going to be thinking about the future. You're not going to be thinking about how can I build something? How can I take risk, fail, and rinse and repeat until I can find what I'm good at and learn from my mistakes. That's two very different paradigms. And the people that have the latter paradigm are going to be successful, are going to be financially successful. And the people that have the former paradigm are always going to point the finger at the rich and they're not being taxed enough and they're lucky and it's white supremacy. That's why those two paradigms, it creates such a different life. Because one paradigm, when your feet hits the floor, you're like, what can I do today to advance my life? And what value can I produce? Can I solve a problem, or can I solve a pain, or can I create a convenience? What can I do so that I can be a value, and then that value is going to turn into money? Or who's going to offend me today? How is my mental health going to be impacted today? And that's what they push on kids. It's always about, the be kind and the anti-bullying. And they've taken it so far now that if somebody just doesn't agree with you, it's bullying and it's hate and all those things. And when you do that, you break a child very early on. And they can't possibly think about things like delayed gratification, or as you so well put it, that self-discipline.
Okay, so Alvin, just one final question here. And obviously, you're very much an expert in the subject that we're discussing today. So I'm wondering if you could just distill all that knowledge that you have down to, one important advice to give to people who may be struggling, whether financially or in other aspects of their life, to become successful. What would that message be?
The message is you're only one generation away from changing the destiny of your bloodline. And it's up to you. Nobody's stopping you. There's no boogeyman. There's no systemic racism. There's no systemic this and that. And if that's what you're being told, then yeah, you're going to be a failure. That's just the hard, honest truth. But the best advice I can give parents is make sure that your children understand that they are only one generation away from changing the destiny of their bloodline. And it doesn't matter where they come from. And don't ever let them tell your children that the nonsense like white supremacy exists, because it simply flat out doesn't.
Well, okay, Alvin, it was such a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for giving us your time.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it.